This is the Chapter 3 Stigma Podcast. This podcast was created to be there for any individual who feels like they are at a low point in life and are confused, seemingly alone, and helpless in their situation. I am a recovering alcoholic, and I felt this way too, until I sat across the table from another addict who shared his story and made me realize that I was not alone in my struggles. My life was saved by this realization, and I hope to help anyone struggling by sharing my story to show you that you are not alone and that life can contain unbelievable riches and meaning. Welcome. I am glad you are here. Hey folks, welcome to another episode of the Chapter 3 Stigma Podcast. In today's podcast, we are going to be diving into the third chapter of my story and my battle with alcoholism. And we will be talking about my journey into active recovery. And we will pick up where we left off from the last podcast, where I had hit my low point in really what was my own self-created hell. And once again, here with me, I have my wife, Alyssa.
Hello.
And this is really going to be our first time in any manner sitting down together and talking about what has all occurred in the last 10 months, because it has certainly been a lot more than simply not drinking for me. We have had incredible hardship, an intense amount of grief and suffering, and it's impossible not to talk about that as it pertains to my maintenance and upkeeping of my journey on active recovery. So we do have a box of tissues sitting next to us. They're pulled out because I'm a little under the weather right now, but I have a feeling that we might need them for some other reasons, and as this is a very emotional topic for us, is we're gonna tell the story of our daughter as a part of this. So first of all, jumping or picking back up where we left off on the last podcast, it was essentially me waking up on May 14th of 2023 after going through 2 days of deciding that alcohol was either going to take my life or I was going to make a radical change, knowing that and feeling, I shouldn't say knowing, but just like feeling that things had become unmanageable. But I don't think I had the awareness or the vocabulary even to call it unmanageable. But after being in recovery right now, that's really where we hit. And so May 14th, we woke up, and quite honestly, like I found out that my parents were currently in the air, flying from Minneapolis to Boise to be with us, because things had gotten so bad that family, even in Minnesota, and was involved in those last 2 days, and they were engaged with us and reaching out and knowing that I was struggling and that I was drinking and that things had hit a new level of darkness and a new low point for us. So I had all of my family, basically 2 sisters, brother-in-law, mom and dad, all just reaching out and feeling so helpless and not knowing what they could do, being 1,800 miles away from us. And so Sunday, May 14th was also Mother's Day, and I woke up. I really just remember intense despair waking up. I don't know what you felt, Alyssa, but for me, it's like I knew that there was something incredibly wrong and that my entire approach had to change.
Yeah, I want to back up and just say that also with
Just keep going.
so I want to back up and say that it should be noted too that this was not the first time that an emergency, if you will, flight had been taken by Kyle's parents, or even there were scenarios too where other family members had made a short flight out to us, or we're sending messages and really just trying to help wherever they could from afar. And it was very difficult. And I think that we got to a point where, or I got to the point that morning, when I say we, I mean Kyle and I, where it's like this is it. Something has to actually change. And I felt like there was a difference. I honestly didn't really care that it was Mother's Day at all. Like, that was not my focus, and I'm the mother in the household, and I should have been feeling like it was my day, but it really felt like our focus for the day needed to be on Kyle and what we could do to combat the situation. It had just come to such a head that it was like, why are we still toying around with this? Like, we know what the problem is now. Like, what can we do?
Well, and we woke up and we had Grant and we were taking care of Grant, but we're also looking at really it came down to a couple locations, and you made some
rehabs.
For rehabs. Yep, thank you for that clarification. So you made a couple calls, and it was kind of funny. So we were really circling on this place called North Point that was in a town called Meridian, like 15-20 minutes from our front door, and it really seemed like a standout location in the Pacific Northwest. And we called them, and their response was, yeah, we can check you in. I think they offered us 2 check-in times that Sunday. And it was just like, from my perspective, it was this like, oh, holy crap. No, that's way too fast. Like, I can't imagine just turning around and going in. And I had this experience where all of these excuses started flooding in when they offered those basically like immediate check-in opportunities. And I think, like, sitting here now and reflecting back on it, there was probably a sliver of doubt in my mind yet where I was like, no, maybe I can get out of this. Maybe I can just prove that I'm serious about this by talking about rehab. But like, surely I'm not going to walk through the front doors of rehab. And in some, or not in some ways, in a big way, like, I was still doing this for you, Alyssa, and for the rest of my family, talking about going in and recognizing that I had a problem. But it was an incredibly scary place to be for myself, to really be facing this issue head on, finally, after all of these years. And my parents got into town and were just pitching in, helping out, talking with us. Obviously, it was very emotional. And by the time, if my memory serves me right, by the time they walked through the doors, we had decided that it was North Point that I was going to go to.
I honestly couldn't tell you exactly what that timeline looked like, but I will say that one thing that really stands out to me is what your visitation rights would be. That was like one of the main things that I felt like when we were trying to make a decision. It was like, oh, I can't go an entire week without seeing my wife and my son. I can't go. One of the places had like 2 days a week visiting hours, but then we were looking at it, it's like, what about nap time or bedtime, and like, how is this going to impact our son? Like, there was just so many entities of this or barriers that I think that we were finding, or that you were pushing back with, and not like actively pushing back with, but it was like, but what about this and what about that, and like having all of our ducks in a row with it all was a priority to you, because you're still wanting to be the responsible, other half of our household.
Yeah. And that's really what it was. Just, and what was amazing about having the family support in person out here that we did, I would literally come up with an excuse, and one or both of my parents or you, Alyssa, would immediately go, here's how we're going to address it. And so it was like, well, gosh, Grant, like how is Alyssa supposed to manage with Grant alone? And
turns out I only had to go 5, I think, a total of 5 nights
out of 28
out of the
days.
28 nights that Kyle was at rehab. There was only 5 nights that I was in the house by myself with our son.
Yeah.
And
our family leaned in big time.
They did. I mean, ultimately I was able to make some adjustments to my work too, so that I could be around for my son more, because it was really difficult to, have him not have the stability of having Kyle around, but for me to be around was important as well. So we were able to make those adjustments there, and family are just really, they would move mountains for us. They've always been able to prove to us and make their way out here to visit us as well. But in those moments, like we saw it, they showed up big time.
Yeah, we were lucky in that manner. Additionally, an obvious and big excuse that popped up was work. I can't leave work. There's no way. And again, having in that exact instance, my dad in particular there, we just sat down and we talked through what to do. It's one text message to my boss setting up a call for early the next day, to basically say I'm going to be gone for at least a month, and there's some paperwork or online, I guess, forms to fill out, and the work excuse was out of the way. So anyway, on Mother's Day, we got lined up and scheduled a formal intake to North Point on the next day, Monday, the 15th of May. And Alyssa and I drove to, or I should say my mom drove Alyssa and I to rehab, so that I guess you and I could sit together and not be distracted by driving in what was going to be really like our last 30 minutes together for quite some time. And saying goodbye to Grant was, and my dad, but leaving your 2-year-old, almost 2-year-old behind, and just knowing that you have not been the father that you wanted to be and that you could be for him. It was heartbreaking. And I don't know,
I think the argument we came up with for that one in particular, because that was one of your big pushback or barriers that we needed to work out, was that this is such a blip in his life. This is such a small period of time. 28 days is nothing as compared to the rest of his life. He's young enough that he's barely going to remember this. We were able to basically say to him, like, Dad's on a trip, and every week we came and visited you, and we had that opportunity, thankfully being so close to the rehab facility, that we could see you every week. And occasionally when you would take phone calls, Grant would still be awake or whatever, and we'd chat. And so I think that that was an easy barrier to get through for you.
Yeah, I wouldn't call it easy, but it was, with the support that was there, we were able to work through it. And so when we actually got to North Point, Alyssa walked in the doors with me, and she actually was there for the initial part of the intake process, which they set you up with a technician, kind of take you through like paperwork and things like that. But it may have, I mean, I don't want to downplay it on your perspective, or experience, but quite literally the most difficult single act I have ever taken as an individual is walking through the doors of rehab. I don't know if I could have done it alone. And so having you there was very much needed. It was extremely and intensely surreal. And it felt like within 5 minutes, all of a sudden the text said, put your phone and your wallet on the table, and I'm going to go check them in at the nursing station where they'll be kept for the next 28 days. And I'll give you two 3 to 5 minutes to say goodbye.
Yeah, it was surreal for you. It was also surreal for me to be in the position that we were in. I was very grateful that they were able to get you in so quickly, and that this was something that you were ultimately willing to do, because I told you before the decision was made, I said, you have to do this for yourself. If I am the reason that you're going, I don't think that this is going to be the answer, and that you have to check your ego at the door and really give it your all, participate in and take on every opportunity, and do this for you.
Yeah. So you got escorted out of the room. And while they were doing that, I was alone, sitting there. And from that, I guess, goodbye and the conversation with you leading up, I really committed myself to maintaining 2 promises throughout my time in rehab. The first was to not question anything. I committed to believing that any activity, that anything that they had us do while I was in rehab was with our best interest in mind. Questioning things and like pushing back in ways that I had been up to that point had led me to where I was. And so I committed to letting go of that and just trusting that they had my best interests in mind. And the second thing I committed myself to do was, I honestly, I don't know where I got this idea, but I knew that deep down my self-hate for myself was one of the key reasons or root causes that I was struggling so much. And so I committed to myself that every single time I passed a mirror, I had to look into my eyes and I had to say out loud, I love you. And with that, I got led through the rehab facility and kind of given the tour, and then basically turned over to my group. So the way rehab worked, where I was at, was say about 40 people. They split into 2 groups, and the vast majority of your time was spent in group therapy sessions and covering different topics. You would get lessons on like the deep, like scientific studies or mechanisms at play with addiction. And then you would have those like very intimate, emotional, just open discussion times. And I really maintained that I was going to do the work. It was obviously not common to have 28 days to basically work on yourself. So if I was given that time, I was going to get serious about it.
So I think another thing to point out about the rehab facility you were at is that you were not under any sort of like court order to be there.
Right.
You also had the ability to walk out the front door any day that you were there. You were never required to stay. It was always by choice that you were or were not going to be there. And that was a big piece of it. You did have to undergo a detox period, which I'm sure you'll get into here, but I'll just say from my perspective, those days were those days were long for me because as you know, as your
Well, we
partner,
couldn't talk.
we couldn't.
I didn't have phone. I didn't have
Right.
phone call rights.
Right. You don't have phone call rights during that period. It's really like this focused in time because you're being watched so closely, like from a medical standpoint, and just the process that they put you through with that is one in which sometimes like you're on a medication that, you know, would make you more tired. So you're doing a lot of sleeping. That's what they described it to me as, is like this time period is usually like there's a lot of sleep that's occurring to allow your body to come off of whatever your drug of choice is.
And I would just interject there. That's kind of dependent on how hot and fast you come into rehab.
Right.
Like, they were surprised when they were doing my intake that because they have you blow for BAC, and I blew a 0 because I hadn't drank in well over 24 hours, and they were kind of surprised by that, and I was surprised that they were surprised. And then it turns out that often when people go into rehab, they sort of have this like, hey, I got to give it one last go sort of experience. But yeah, all I have noted about detox, the detox period, is that it was weird. The meds, I don't remember the name of the meds that they have us on, but it's basically anti-seizure medication because my drug of choice was alcohol, and there is a very significant risk of coming off of and detoxing off of alcohol. So they have you on this anti-seizure pill, which I guess I didn't sleep. I know a lot of people that slept, but I'm like, seriously, I did not miss a session. I jumped right into it. Like, I figured if I'm here, I'm going to be here. And so I got right into group therapy, but yeah, it was very much a bit of a, like, disengage from my actual body experience. But really, I said this before, like, rehab is 28 days long. And if you know anything about like the basics of habit formation, it takes 3 weeks or 21 days to form a habit. So really, detox is an opportunity to reconnect and form new habits.
You're saying rehab?
Plus a buffer period.
You said detox.
I said detox.
Rehab?
I meant rehab.
Okay,
yeah,
just
thank
wanted
you.
To be clear for everyone
Yeah,
listening.
rehab is your chance to really form new habit loops. And so I was very aware of the routines and the habits that I was creating while I was in rehab. And so what it looked like was I never set an alarm. I would go to bed about 10 o'clock at night. I again, let my body rest, and I was generally waking up around 6 a.m. And then I made sure to move my body every day about midday. They had a small gym in there that I just, use the space, use the equipment, and I really just let my body lead and let my body heal. And then I really worked during the group sessions. But generally speaking, what my day would look like, especially as I got beyond that detox period and started to kind of feel myself again, I woke up and there was a group in the morning before everything formally kicked off that would meditate, and I would join them like 50-50. It was a nice way to start the day. It was a nice practice. And then every morning I journaled, and I really found journaling was one of the most important, like, early steps that I did and new habits that I started creating. And I found that it was relieving a lot of anxiety and self-doubt and just allowing myself to kind of process the fact that I was in rehab and I was indeed doing this.
Excuse me. I'm going to jump in about the journaling too. Journaling is something that you used to do like when we first started dating, especially when you were traveling in your study abroad period. So hearing that and, knowing you for all these years, like it was good to know that you were back to doing those things again.
Right.
It really, I think it brought up some of your like previous hobbies that you may have had, and like getting into like having a daily routine for exercising was always something that was very important to you that I think had kind of gone to the wayside through your addictions. It was cool to see and hear about these things being a part of your life again.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So then, to finish off the morning, I would grab some coffee and just kind of chat with folks in the eating area, just as the day was formally getting kicked off and getting started. And for our group morning sessions, we would take 15 minutes, just go around the room and state how we were feeling and what our goals were for the day. And I really jumped all over this goals aspect, because again, it was something that I had done previously and I really let fall to the wayside, and I got out of practice of it. And I really, at the end, when I was in the throes of hell, struggling with my addiction, like I had no direction. I had no vision or goals for my life. So this daily goals routine was really nice. And again, one of my goals, it was easy for me because we had to come up with 2 goals. And one of my goals every day was work out or move, just in some manner. So
I think I'll cut in and say something you've told me before as well, was that you also at some point during the day did some gratitude practice every day, correct?
Yep. So that's it. Yep. We'll get there.
Okay. Sorry. Don't mean to jump ahead.
So then after goal setting, we got into like our intense group sessions for the morning. Again, like my outlook there was just share and participate. Like, again, it's not often you have 28 days to just sit down and work on yourself. So I was committed to putting the work in. And then we would do some group activity. We had yoga. We had mindfulness practice. We had I think like 3 of the 4 Fridays that I was in there, they brought this person in that did this like gong or bowl
Sound
meditation, this sound bath. Yeah. I'm going to let you, as a listener, go ahead and Google that. That was incredible. It's hard to explain, but like, if you really get into it, that experience, like I think about it often, and I find that I'm able to just like relax thinking back and reflecting on those sound bath sessions that we would do. So then that would wrap the morning up. They'd give us a long break for lunch. So that's when I would go, and I'd always do a workout, and it was really never more than 20, 25 minutes, but I would move, and I would move myself hard. And there were people that would join me every once in a while, but I was not dependent on someone else committing to working out for me to go and move my body. Like, I was going to do it every single day, whether or not someone joined me or not. We'd do lunch, then kind of have just socialization time. And then again, we'd go into this long block of afternoon sessions. It'd be a mix of group activities, and just like things like art therapy, which, I like really had to fall back hard on my promise to myself to, believe that everything was good to me when I did art therapy. But funny enough, like some of the deepest lessons that I got in my time during rehab was from these art therapy sessions, where I kind of forced myself to do it because I really didn't feel that it would be beneficial. But, I had promised myself I was going to participate and assume that whatever they were doing was for my own benefit. And I really did get a lot out of art therapy in a surprising way. We would then do dinner, and then we had, in the evenings, we would go off site for meetings, and that was literally the only time we were leaving the 4 walls of rehab, or we would have speakers that would come in, and then we're more or less turned loose. Like I said, I was going to bed at pretty routinely at 10 o'clock every night, just because I knew sleep was a huge part of my healing process. Again, the kind of common theme here is like, I really leaned in and participated in everything and really forced myself to get uncomfortable and to share and to just continually work on myself. And what I was finding was many of the exercises and the learnings that I was having while in rehab were not just useful for an addict. And like a lot of these, I plan on sharing in further podcasts. And honestly, some of them I have already. I think I talked about the value exercise with the cards, where we were asked to write down what our top 5 values were in life. And I can't remember mine off the top of my head that I wrote at the time, but like one of them was, be an outstanding father, be an outstanding husband, or I should say my role as husband and father. And then the exercise in rehab was the counselor came around and they forced you to remove one of those 5. And basically you were left with a single value that you're obviously stating you place above everything else. And the point of the value exercise in rehab was to say, like, if maintaining recovery was not your highest value, you should be able to lose everything that you placed above it. And I had a hard time like buying into that at first, but again, as I believe I've said before, like that really holds true. And that's like one of the things that coming out of rehab, like I do place maintaining my active recovery ahead of everything else in life. But by staying on this path of active recovery, I am able to be the husband that I want to. I am able to be the father and the son and the brother that I want to.
I want to back up for just a moment.
Yeah.
And I feel like you brought this up somewhere along the way. I don't know if it was in this podcast or not, so I think it is worth noting again. And I think there was 2 instances early on at rehab that helped you to also buy in to what you were doing and why you were there. And one of them was one that I witnessed, and that was when we were sitting in the intake room. The technician who was doing intake said something to the effect of, "Are you scared? You look kind of scared right now." And he was saying it in a very kind way, or nervous. Maybe it was nervous. And you said, "Yeah, I am." And he said, "There's no need to be nervous." He said, "I have sat in your place before, and everyone here is here to help you. And, we've got your back," basically. And the second scenario, and you'll tell it better than I will, but was when you sat down for your first meal and you sat across from someone who asked you what your drug of choice was, right?
Yep. Yeah. And I mean, like I didn't dive into that because I detail that in the intro of this podcast all the time, but truly my life was changed and saved in a large way because of this stranger that invited me to sit down. And he just started openly sharing and talking about his experience and his struggle with his drug of choice, which was not alcohol. But what I was experiencing in that moment is that our thought patterns and our reactions and responses to our emotions and our like self-view was identical. And this guy and I had basically nothing in common, but all of a sudden it made me realize, like, my God, I'm not alone in this struggle at all.
Yeah. And I think that was so powerful for you. You really needed that. And that was something that like I couldn't provide to you. I could tell you from my experiences and with my profession being in healthcare, just like what I see, how commonly I see these types of situations, not necessarily alcohol, but just mental health in general. And so I felt like I could always tell you, but I couldn't show you the way that you could see that by being at rehab and by being around other people who have had like similar scenarios to you. And I don't think that you had this in your agenda, but I also want to point out visitations. So on Sundays, myself and our son Grant, and then various weeks we had different family members that would come see you. We would come and spend about an hour and a half with you. And the very first week that we came to see you was just Grant and I. And there was a very significant shift for you already at that point. And you were 6 days in, 7 at most. And I was like, wow, his eyes look better. His skin looks better. And these were just like subtle things that had like slowly shifted in you that I was really seeing those changes, or just like your perspective, your attitude, the way that you, your excitement to see us, was a shift, and it maybe didn't look that big to you in the moment, but it felt really big to me and to both Grant and I in the moment. And I think that like that carried on through the coming weeks of, you know, your family being able to see you as well. It's, oh, I can't wait for you to see the change, because I just think you'll be surprised by the difference that has really occurred in such a short period of time.
Yeah. Yeah. And so we'll get to the second week of visitation actually momentarily, because something big happened. But before that happened, or before that second visit, I did realize one thing. And that was I was not maintaining one of the promises to myself, that I would buy in and believe everything that they were doing was good for us. And they, as part of their programming, really did bring in Alcoholics Anonymous as, you know, really an opportunity for people to get exposed to it and learn about it. And I found I was pushing back on AA a lot. And one of the core reasons was AA is a spiritual program. And so there is a requirement, well, not a requirement, but like really if you are to do AA, there is a belief in a higher power or God that you have to buy into and truly believe. And I found that I was pushing back on AA and the concept of God. And so one night before we went out for a meeting, I said, you know what? I'm pushing back on this. I'm going to buy in. I'm going to give this a chance. And at that meeting, there was an older gentleman who did a share. And, you know, it just so happened that the topic that night was about your higher power and God. And the extent of this gentleman's share was this, and I remember it verbatim because this is all it was. I don't want a God that I can understand. And as simple and more or less innocuous as that statement might seem, that unlocked everything for me. I had been looking for and requiring myself to understand something in order to believe in it, which is just kind of not even the point of belief. And so this statement, like, I could not get out of my head, and it really resonated with me, and I started thinking about it deeply. And really that night, like, I was questioning, I'm like, what is the actual downside of myself as an individual believing in God? And to this day, like, I don't have an answer to that. And that is in a large part why I decided, I guess, decided isn't the right word, but like, that's how I came back to faith and belief in God and a higher power. And, you know, on further like reflection and thinking, it's like, who am I to say that there's no God? Like, that is such an egotistical stance to take and I had taken it. I absolutely had taken it, that I was so smart that I knew so much that I could say that there was no God. And so after that evening, I was all in, and it was really the moment that everything changed for me in rehab. That second week visit, Alyssa was...
I was nervous.
You were nervous.
Let's just start by saying that I was nervous.
Yeah, I could tell something was on your mind. And at the end of the visit, she started crying, or I should say, just like you started tearing up, and you said something, I don't remember your exact words, but you said something about being afraid. And you said,
I was worried about our ability to get through this. I said, is our relationship, like, is it strong enough to get through what you're going through? And not from the standpoint of, well, I'll just put it this way. It was more about, like, you're growing big time in this situation. Are we growing together? Are we growing apart? And I was nervous about that because I also had just found out that I was pregnant with our second child.
Yep. And so Alyssa shared this news with me, and there was like a big difference in our reaction. Like instantly upon hearing it, I was excited. And that's not to say that you weren't excited, but you had more apprehension. And this because you did not, I think there were so many unknowns in your mind about how I was doing and how things were going to be when I left. And this is like a critical and important point about anyone going through rehab or even just entering into recovery as a whole. And a really close friend of mine that I made in rehab, he and I talked about this a lot as we were approaching our departure from rehab. We called it day zero. And really what the concept was as individuals in rehab, like we had gone through and felt so much growth and so much advancement in ourselves. Yet the ones that are closest to us and our loved ones on the outside, like we're only talking to them 15 minutes, maybe 15 minutes a day if we're lucky. And then seeing them once a week, they don't get to see that progress and growth. So like we get out of rehab and we feel amazing about where we all are. We feel so confident. And then you get slammed with these loved ones, these family and friends who are like not there with you. And that's not because they don't trust you. That's not because they don't love you. It is literally that they are not there experiencing your growth and your change. And that causes a lot of issues for people, like in the form of relapse, where they'll get to the point of being like, well, God, I went through all of this in rehab and, I committed to it. And then I get out and like my wife or my husband or my kids, they don't trust me. Like what gives? I spent 28 days. And so me and this buddy of mine, we talked about our day zero constantly and knowing that like we had a lot of work to do with those that we loved. And I could see that like reflected in you delivering that news about you being pregnant. There was some concern about like, what is this going to look like for us?
Exactly. Yeah. So it was, I actually called your counselor, found out.
Yeah, she found out before me.
Because I was concerned about delivering the message at the right time. Like, how is Kyle doing? Like, is he in a place where he's going to be able to accept this information and is it going to help him or is it going to hurt him? Mm-hmm. Because I didn't want to do anything that would negatively impact your recovery process.
Right. So kind of fast forwarding through the rest of the time in rehab, then like my big takeaways and the things I discovered about myself is I really started believing that I love myself. And that directly came from the mirror exercise. And I found myself being way more forgiving and tolerant of mistakes that I made and genuinely wanting the best for me and wanting me to be healthy and wanting me to find joy and meaning in life. And one aspect of that is because I didn't love myself in the time period leading up to rehab, I could never believe why anyone else would love me. And it caused me to distance myself from friendships, from family. So it really felt amazing to start believing that I loved myself. I also discovered I had lost significant trust and faith in the world in general and in others. And so I was able to start addressing that and looking at the world differently because yes, the world is full of all kinds of suffering, but there's still beauty in it. And again, a big part of this was like forgiveness on my own side of the road, because it's like losing trust in other individuals was because I felt betrayed or tricked. And it's like, you know what? In some cases for me, it was part of the learning process of life. And I really found a lot of healing basically in doing the opposite of what I had been doing up to that point, which was lying and hiding. And so truth was really becoming my source of strength and power. And obviously this podcast is like part of that outcome or output. And the funny thing about it is the truth was super easy compared to keeping up with a lie. Keeping up with a lie was exhausting. You had to remember what twists and turns you told to what people and try to figure out how to tie it. It was mentally exhausting. And with the truth, really all you had to say was the way I see it or the way I remember it is, and then, state the truth as you see it. So leaving North Point after 28 days, I did have genuine fears. Again, the place was only 15 or 20 minutes from my front door, and I left at 5:45 a.m. on a Monday. And I counted 6 places that I could walk into and legally buy alcohol, my drug of choice, from on the drive home from rehab to my house. And it really hit me that I was just going to have to learn how to live with alcohol around me. And so I really committed myself to making myself fit enough to do so. And so what I did following my 28-day inpatient rehab is I started something called partial hospitalization program, which is basically group therapy from, it was 9 to 2 in this instance every single day, but I was living at home. I had the freedom to, do what I wanted to do, go to AA meetings, like pick up my son from daycare. Like I could start to come back into the normal routines of the world. But I really focused on, during that 5-week time frame, of setting and forming new habits and routines after getting out of rehab, because quite frankly, like rehab is a safe space. It's like a bubble in there. Like, and I'm sure Alyssa, you felt a little concerned too, because it's like what the 28 days that I was in rehab, you knew that I was safe, that there were no real risks of me finding my drug of choice.
Right. And I forget the exact way that this was put, but it was a really good analogy. It was about how rehab, maybe you know this one. Rehab is like putting out the fire, or like the really hot part of the fire, the active part of the fire, and that what you do in recovery after those 28 days is like keeping the fire at bay. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, no, there's a forest fire analogy here somewhere. You told me about it, but it was from one of the family sessions that I did not attend.
Yeah,
so
and it something along those lines though, but essentially it's just like we put out the main cause, the main flame, and then you're just keeping everything at bay after that point. And that means like, how are we maintaining things? And how are we keeping it under control, more or less?
And I think a huge aspect of my mindset coming out of rehab was I did not view myself as cured. Leaving rehab, I was convinced that I was an alcoholic for life. I maintained that conviction, and I witnessed and have experienced a lot of people struggle when they leave rehab and they think they are cured. Truly, I am of the belief that there's no cure for alcoholism or addiction. You learn how to live on a road of active recovery. You learn how to live with your addiction as a part of you, and it doesn't need to define and drive every aspect of your life. And so part of my routine during that period after leaving rehab was I found a great morning meeting that I went to. I connected with a sponsor, and I started step work in AA. Like I said, I really got into the AA thing. And like a great thing about Alcoholics Anonymous is like I believe in God. I believe in a higher power, and yet I have a sponsor who would call himself an atheist. Yet he has had a spiritual awakening himself, and he has a spiritual conviction. And so there's a beauty. But at the end of the day, he and I are both alcoholics, and we suffer from the same disease. And so I really started getting down and doing the step work. And quite honestly, things were going incredibly well. and really smoothly, leading up to my 90-day, which 90 days in the world of addiction is it's a pretty big marker. I think the stat is somewhere around 60% of relapses happen within the first 90 days. And there's a concept in the world of addiction and recovery. It's called the pink cloud. And it's just kind of like this happy-go-lucky space that you mental and or like emotional and physical space that you get into after getting off of your drug of choice. Because guess what? Like, you feel way better when you're not drinking alcohol as much as I had been drinking. And so again, this concept, this idea of day 90 for me stood out in a really big way. And leading up to my 90 days of time in active recovery, I actually found myself questioning when it was going to get hard. And God just had to be rolling on the floor laughing at that. Hey folks, your host Kyle here. So this episode got long and it got emotional. So I have made the decision to split it into 2 parts. So we will be releasing the second episode that will be Lucy's story later this week. And thank you for following along. We look forward to bringing it to you. All the best. If you enjoyed this podcast, share it with others or give us a rating on your channel of choice. My hope is that my story can help others in their struggles with addiction or any other aspects of life that they feel could be bettered. You can follow us on social media at Chapter 3 Stigma on Instagram and YouTube. I cannot solve your problems for you, but I can listen. If you want to reach out with a message through one of those channels, I will respond and let you know that you are not alone. All the best, you are loved, and life is worth every struggle and bit of suffering you have to endure. Until next time, all the best.